So yeah, well, welcome. Excited to kick off our Prepare for VC and EllisX event on the right way. And yeah, this will be part of the Prepare for VC community. So if you haven't joined in already, we'll put in a link in the chat box, and basically offering free events like these, other resources, access to great providers, advisors, and basic a platform for everything you're looking for in the startup community in one space. Some content and events we put out, we organize directly and put out like this one, and other great, community events our partners are putting together that we showcase in this space as well. So definitely jump in there. Feel free to connect with each other. You can look at the event today and comment on that throughout, or we'd love to have everybody introduce themselves in the chat here on Zoom. And yeah, really excited for tonight's event. Yeah, we have a great panelists lined up. I'm gonna add them to pinned. I'm gonna pin them all up at the top here. And excited, yeah, really excited for this event. And yeah, all of definitely, we're gonna keep it as a moderated discussion. So Leia is gonna be the moderator here for tonight's event. And any time you guys have questions or want to, feel free to jump in the chat. We're also going to save some time towards the end for anybody that wants to come on stage and ask some questions directly. And yeah, and with that, I'll hand it over to Leia, Elizabeth, and Frederick to introduce themselves. And yeah, and Leia to kick things off here.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Jason. Excited to be here with you guys and host this discussion. My name is Leia Ruseva, and I'm the co-founder of EllisX. EllisX is a Boston-based startup that is supercharging the relationship between startups and media. What that means is that startups get curated access to media and speaking opportunities on EllisX. And at the same time, writers, podcasters, and event organizers can connect with relevant startup founders that they can interview with minimum effort. So with that, we are very excited to be a part of this event, and I would love to have our lovely panelists introduce themselves. So Elizabeth, I'm going to start with you.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I am a freelance writer. I do a lot of ghostwriting, helping tech companies and startup founders and other organizations explain what it is. Explain what it is they do in human terms. My background actually is in language acquisition and linguistics, but my students were doing such cool things with their startup ideas that I ended up switching full-time to freelance writing just to be able to be in the room with remarkable people. And so far it's going well.
Awesome. Fred, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself next.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Frederick Dasso. I'm the founder of Founder to Founder, a Substack newsletter dedicated to covering the best early stage startup founders, getting their advice and sharing it throughout the broader tech ecosystem, as well as connecting individuals who want these high potential early opportunities at these young companies and getting the upside from that. Aside from that, I'm also a senior contributor to Forbes, where I cover early stage startups. I've been doing this for the past 3 years and covered over 150 companies in that time. So it's been a wonderful journey, and I'm happy to talk about my experiences. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Fred. And Miriam, would you mind coming on stage and introducing yourself as well? Oh, it seems like she is not here with us. That's okay. Well, in this case, we can just kick things off and get started. Awesome. So all of you guys are writing and working with startups. So I'd love to kick things off by learning what each one of you thinks the relevance and role of writing is when it comes to entrepreneurship. Elizabeth, do you want to get us started?
Sure. Writing is such an important part of communication, but it's kind of a modern, what am I trying to say? It's kind of a modern focus. So for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, we have focused as a species on oral communication and the vital part of oral storytelling. And it's only in the last, since the last 200 years that we have shifted this focus to the importance of writing. And it's almost like if you don't have something down in written form, people don't believe it, they don't take it seriously. And whether or not that continues to be the focus or not, that's the reality that we have now. Now, we've moved away from, the sort of dry, boring academic writing, thanks to the internet. The internet has opened up writing for, nonfiction interest in a way that is really fascinating and really, really important. And I would encourage everyone here, if you have not been reading Fred's Forbes column, you need to pen it because it is really, it's a really great example of the power of writing fast, quick, really impactful stories and what it can do to bring remarkable people to the forefront of a noisy place like the internet. But it is a very important skill. And that's that's such a cliche thing to say, but without a good body of written material in several different styles and for different purposes, it's hard to really get your story out there. Yes.
Awesome. And Fred, do you have any thoughts on the subject as well? Fred, I think
just need to unmute myself. Yeah, absolutely. When I think about writing, I think about the word narrative. It's incredibly important for, from the perspective of a founder to communicate whatever they're building to a lay audience who doesn't have the same background, depth of expertise that they do, right? Because at the end of the day, the narrative is the first thing that a potential customer will experience, a potential investor will examine, and potential employee may engage in to see whether this is the right company for me to join and such like that. So as a writer, my duty is to take these difficult complicated topics and boil it down into everyday language that the average person can not only understand, but then can start to have a reasonable conversation with that expert in terms of, this is what you're doing, this is why you're doing it, and this is what's going to happen as a result of you doing X, Y, and Z, right? So it's just important to focus on narrative to help founders be able to communicate that at large, and to really give the public, allow them to be interested and partake in what's being built and keep track of it as the company grows.
Awesome. So Fred, you actually touched upon my next question when you talked about the importance of founders explaining what they do to an audience that may not be as familiar with the space and the problem that they're solving. So with that, I would like to ask both of you how you think that startups can leverage the power of storytelling to explain their mission and vision of the world and help their ventures get more exposure.
Yeah, one practical example of this would honestly be fundraising. When it comes down to fundraising, when you're in a high stakes pitch meeting with investors, whether they're Y Combinator or the local shop down the road, narrative is really your vehicle for delivering what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how this is going to change the world, and why an investor should be a part of it. The difference between, getting that term sheet, getting an opportunity to sign a term sheet or not, is how well you're able to convey your story. And that's why I always recommend to founders, you should really practice your writing, because it's going to help you clarify your thought. What you think you're saying and what you actually say are two different things, and writing helps you bridge the gap between, what you understand and what your audience needs to understand. And it changes based on who you're speaking to.
Awesome. Elizabeth, would you like to weigh in as well?
Yes, I want to just take a moment to let everyone mourn the idea that no one cares about the features of what you're offering for your for your startup or your service. And I'm going to tell a story, and there is a point to the story, I promise. So I spent about a decade teaching English as a second language, primarily adults and college graduate students. And every term that I taught upper level writing, we had to have a few days for students to grieve the knowledge that they had in their native language and how that did not translate to writing in English. And we always had students that were very resistant to the idea of learning to write in an English structure, because what we consider to be good writing, effective writing, impactful writing can vary from language to language. It's not a universal thing. And so when students would write their first paper for me, they would write it inevitably in the structure of their native language with English words, and then they would get their papers back and it would be all wrong, this is terrible. And obviously that's not what I said ever, but that's what they would hear, is that this is wrong, you're doing it wrong, everything is wrong, everything that you know is wrong. And I find that when I work with startup founders, I have a similar conversation with them, because they want to talk about an amazing system that they've built, or something that they've managed to scale up that no one ever thought anyone could scale up, or something that they've managed to scale down that no one could thought that they would scale down. And they have to let go of the idea that people want to hear solely the features. People want to know the so what of the story. They want to know how this relates to their own lives. And that can be frustrating for founders when writers and marketers come in and say, no, you can't talk about the features, you have to talk about the story. And they're like, but I feel like I'm doing this right. And so I want everyone who is listening to know that there is a time and place for you to talk about the specs of your product, the specs of your line, the specs of whatever, but also, more importantly, you have to draw a line, as he was saying, between what you know and what other people know. And it's kind of like bridging the gap between writing from language to language. It's almost like learning a new type of writing skill, because if you're a tech founder, you're so used to talking about tech features, and then you go to a business and this business owner doesn't understand the tech features, and they don't care necessarily about this amazing thing that you've created, and that's sad. And you can have a moment of, oh my gosh, I really want to talk about this. But it is learning the skill of adapting what you're saying to the context, if that makes sense to anybody.
Yeah, that's perfect. I love that idea of translating into different languages, because whether you're a marketer, whether you're an operations person or a technical person, we all speak different languages, and it's important to communicate that in an effective way.
Yes.
Which leads to my next question. How do you think specifically technical founders who might be very deep in the weeds can communicate effectively with non-tech audiences? What can they do to align themselves better with those audiences? Yeah, Elizabeth, I meant that for you. Like, I don't know if that was clear.
That's fine. It takes a lot of practice. I mean, this is not a skill that you learn overnight. Even if you are a naturally good writer, this is something, learning to translate from context to context takes a lot of practice. And so you have to just get yourself out there and write things that are not necessarily good. I can't remember who said it, a marketing guru said that, you know, the law of averages says that half of the things you write will be below average and half of the things that you write will be above average. And you have to get the below average things together, you know. But I think, you know, when you're dealing with the so what of getting your story out there, there are three things that I like to ask my clients when I'm working on with them to get their story straight. First of all, I am not a developer. And so I have a good threshold for, you know, if I can't understand what you're saying to me, then this is probably not something that your ideal audience is going to say. And so I am a sounding board in some cases for this is too technical, this is too in the weeds. But I have 3 A's that I think about. So the first thing is it arguable? Not as in like an internet argument, but like, is there a claim that you have that you can back up that relates to your product? So for example, if you can get a company from installation to ROI, measurable ROI in 6 weeks, that's an arguable claim. That's a great story that somebody would want to know how you can do that. Is it answerable? So for example, a pain point would be an answerable topic. Do you have a solution to this pain point? Or can you answer a question that someone doesn't understand? Can you answer, you know, I was looking at the comments, someone does fashion with diverse body types. So is there something out there for my body type is an answerable story. And then is it appropriate in scope? So obviously, you know, if you're doing a 1-pager, you can't get deep into your own story, you know, but if you're releasing an ebook, then you have endless amounts of space to answer a question. And so, you know, a LinkedIn post is going to be very different in scope than a brochure that you're going to do or something like that. So arguable, answerable, appropriate in scope would be a good place to start.
Awesome. And Fred, as somebody who is technical and is also a writer, I would love to get your thoughts on this subject. How can you translate concepts? And we'd also love to learn more about the origins of Founder to Founder and why you created it in the first place.
And, you know, I just wanted to piggyback, you know, right off of what Elizabeth was saying here, because she's so right in the sense of, you know, you have to scope, you have to narrow the scope of what you're talking about, and you have to make sure that whatever is within that scope, it can be translated into something, you know, into, you know, meaningful points that the audience can take away by the time they finish reading your article. So, you know, I definitely agree with that. Given my background and, you know, going a little bit further, so I have, you know, my bachelor's and master's degrees from MIT in aerospace engineering. So I'm very well versed in, you know, technical, you know, in technical work. And so that gives me an advantage in the sense of having done like critical research for my master's thesis. I understand what it's like to having to learn new jargon, and the skill of learning that jargon I take into every single meeting I have with a founder when they're telling me about the new product or service that they're building, right? I ask them to explain to me, well, what does this term mean? What does that term mean? Because I'm always placing myself in the shoes of an audience member who doesn't know, you know, what this particular term means. And having them unpack it, you know, in a conversation with me helps them when they're talking with other groups of people. Like if they are aware that they don't know as much, they will build the habit of this term means X, that term means Y, and so on and so forth. And so through all of my conversations with founders, getting into the second, you know, the second question, you know, what led to Founder? After all the conversations I've had with these founders, I noticed that there's really 2 main things that they all struggle with at the early stages. 1, they generally face the same problems. And then 2, they learn best from one another. You know, founders are in tight-knit communities trying to get the best tips and tricks and, you know, really, you know, important advice in critical stages of your company. So that's why I started Founder to Founder, is to collect all of this and share it with the ecosystem at large. And what I've also realized too is that there's a big challenge in terms of hiring, and not only just like hiring really good people, but hiring people who understand the mission and the culture of the company, because the culture is the basis from which every single team member, especially this is incredibly important at the early stages of their company, that's the basis from which they make decisions in terms of producing long-term value for the company. And so helping potential early stage employees understand the culture and the mission of the company through the work I produce on Founder to Founder helps them find a better fit for the companies that they want to work for the next 5 to 10 years, given that early stage companies take at least 10 years before you see any meaningful exit.
Awesome. And this actually is a perfect segue to my next question, which is about the building in public movement. For those in the audience who may not be familiar with the concept, building in public has gathered momentum over the last year and a half. And it encourages founders or creators to build their companies and followings in public, sharing the ups and downs of their journey. And that can be another avenue through which they gain exposure. So I'd love to learn what both of you think about the building in public movement and how can founders harness it to supercharge their following. I don't know if one of you wants to get started.
Yeah, I'll go ahead here. Yeah, building in public is like you just mentioned, Leia. It's a very recent trend, but it's starting to gain in traction amongst the founders that I speak to. And it's really one that separates, if you know how to do it and you're comfortable as a founder doing it, it really separates you from the rest because you're out there more. Especially this is being done on Twitter, where one company in particular, Copy.ai, like for the first couple of months when they started, they were tweeting out, oh, here's what we hit, here's our MRR for this month, the next month, so on and so forth. And it helps create a sense of momentum, like, wow, this company is actually going somewhere. And they're doing extremely well. And that's because they were able to take, what they're basically doing, which is, helping humans expand their creativity using AI to create more, to create better, higher quality marketing copy, taking that complex topic and distributing that content out in the form of a tweet to a larger audience, which they've been able to recruit, been able to gain the attention of investors and so on and so forth. So it's really a strategy that I recommend for the majority of founders, but it just depends on like what you're building and whether you have an innate ability to explain that to a larger audience, a potentially larger audience who doesn't have the same background or depth of knowledge that you do.
It can also create a pretty strong sense of community with the people that you're recruiting and also the people that are your target audience who you're selling to or helping. And I do agree, if you have a good sense of storytelling, which, storytelling is a muscle, like you get better at everything the more you do it. But, it's not so much an info dump. It has an overarching narrative to it. It has a purpose to it. And so you have a moment, you have a purpose in mind when you begin highlighting your company's humble beginnings to, your wins and your losses, which can also be valuable for a community, highlighting the losses as well. And I think too, it is partially the result of our need to know our companies better. We don't like faceless, mysterious companies anymore. We want something that's real, and we want something that we can identify with, and we want something that we can that matches our own values and our own mission and our own interests. And so I think that it can be a really valuable tool to bring people on board very quick, not quickly, but to bring people sort of deeper on board with you, whether they are actively involved with your company or not. And if you're in the tech space, that's a really competitive hiring space right now. And so it can definitely help you grab some of that top talent away from the Googles and Facebooks of the world. But even if you're not, I like that strategy because I just like the openness of it. I think that being willing to share successes and failures with the larger community creates community, and creating community creates more community, and it creates a natural momentum. If you're comfortable with that,
Yeah, I love that you mentioned community, Elizabeth. And I think that community can be very powerful, and building in public can often lead to community. But in terms of building a community through storytelling, what have you guys observed in that realm, and how can storytelling be more effectively harnessed for building a community?
That's a good question. That's a complex question. um, we are definitely tired of being sold to. You know, the internet has made selling to us, the people, a 24/7 thing. And so I think founders have to have a very strong sense of mission, a very strong sense of identity before the storytelling even gets started, because I think that people are getting really good at sort of sniffing out, especially, you know, June is Pride Month. We're gearing up for everybody suddenly caring about, you know, suddenly caring about pride for our dollars, you know, and I think we're getting a lot better at knowing what's real and what's not. And so small founders sometimes have the luxury of being free to create their mission, something that they something they very strongly believe in. Larger companies have to toe the company line sometimes, but I had a point to this. It just, you have to know yourself before you get started with your story. And I think that that's an advantage for new founders and smaller startups. It's much easier to take a deep dive into who you are as a company and who your company is to the world and to the community as a whole.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Elizabeth here in the sense that we're really searching for authenticity when we're, when startups are trying to build these communities through building in public. And, one of the challenging things is, like knowing what you want to say before you say it. And it takes a lot of time and going back to the drawing board, or, the rough draft to, to get your narrative right. I think, however, some of the best founders that I've seen, leverage community properly. It's done behind the scenes. You won't see it, at least immediately, on a social media site, but they'll have, some Slack channels or Discords where they're talking with their earliest, their most core set of customers, right? And, what happens is that from there, when they put out a tweet, their customers see it, they engage with it. And from that point, that engagement brings in more people, right, who may be interested in this topic. The founders then engage with those new folks, get the best of them who are really engaged, bring them into the community, and then the virtuous cycle continues until you get big Twitter threads with hundreds of likes, and DMs where it's like, hey, you guys have any hirings going on, right? And it takes a lot of legwork. But the most important thing is getting those first set of early adopters, finding the commonalities between them, and then going back to your narrative, going back to your company's story, and figuring out where's the intersection between the two, and then creating that content that fits within a tweet. We're talking about Twitter here, or you could replace that with LinkedIn and deliver that that narrative as a vehicle through content on those social media platforms. It takes a lot of upfront effort, but the companies I see who are doing the best, or who do well, they tend to be able to build in public using this strategy. So.
Great. And Fred, I'd like to ask you one more question specifically, because in addition to being a writer, you're also an entrepreneur yourself. So what advice do you have for entrepreneurs who are trying to document their journeys and amplify their voices this way?
Yeah, one, start early and start often. What I mean by that is that, being able to communicate your story well, naturally, and this goes back to what Elizabeth was saying earlier, storytelling's a muscle. It takes time, it takes effort. But once you feel confident in doing, sharing it with close friends, or even, just at the very least yourself, you'll be able to take that to public settings such as Twitter or LinkedIn, and be able to widely share your story from there. Before I go on, what was the second half of that question there?
Yeah, my question was, what advice do you have for other founders who want to amplify their voices?
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Okay. Yeah. So the first portion of my advice is, start early and do it often. I think the second thing too is, be ready to engage with people, right? Especially if they have critical feedback, both good and bad. If you're a founder, you should look for feedback that is either extremely good or extremely bad. If it's extremely good, great, you're heading in the right direction. If it's extremely bad, great, that's something that you should pay attention to. Focusing on the magnitude of the feedback, prioritizing that over the direction will help you figure out what you need to fix, not just in conveying your narrative, but your actual product or service that you're building, right? And it's important to be hypersensitive to that, because as you grow and as you scale, you're not going to be as involved in the day-to-day of picking up on those things. So you want to be able to build a culture of doing that. If you're the one doing it, you'll be able to set the standard for that type of behavior in your company, to be hypersensitive to those things. And from there, the people that you bring on, you onboard and such like that, they will use that as the basis for making decisions and how to create long-term value for your company. So the founders have to set the example in this regard. And the way to do it is to start and do it often. Make a habit of it. If I had to boil it down, make a habit of it.
Yeah, and that's awesome. So for founders who want to do this and are adept at writing, and that is great advice. But for founders who may need a little bit of help with their storytelling, Elizabeth, that's your bread and butter. So I'm curious, how did you start writing for tech startups, and how have things changed since you first started doing this?
Oh, that's a long, meandering story that will take us well past the Q&A portion of this. No, my bachelor's is in philosophy and my master's is in linguistics, which are two kind of random things. But I wrote for a friend of a friend who had a startup in the AI space, and I won't say who because I was ghostwriting for them, but I did a few articles about natural language processing, which to my linguistic brain was fascinating, and it sort of snowballed from there, and found out again that I just really like being in the room with remarkable people doing remarkable things, and so the more of that I can do, the better. But my clients are all two camps. There's either one that just hate, they can write, they can craft a compelling story, they just hate doing it, and so I do it for them because I love to write. And then the other camp is, people who think they're terrible at writing, and people who think, these same people tend to think that they will always be terrible at writing, which is somewhat a self-defeating cycle. You took a academic writing class in high school and it was terrible because academic writing is terrible, and you think that that's going to be your life for the rest of time. Well, the internet has opened up, again, lots of avenues for writing. And so, if you love taking 2 months to write a really great value-driven ebook for somebody explaining, it's a high-level lead gen thing, then do that. But if you want to be, if you want to write every day 200 words on LinkedIn, there's space for that as well, But again, I would say for my clients, the 3 A's, arguable, answerable, appropriate, and scope, kind of helps start to bring that down a little bit. But I will echo again, the habit. You have to make it a habit because it is a muscle. Everybody can learn to write. Anybody can do what I do. You may not like it, but you can. It just is a matter of, you got to put out a bunch of crap first before you can get to the good stuff. And I was again looking at the chat, and somebody said, how do you know yourself before you start getting a message out there? And, you know, sometimes that's writing for yourself. You may have to just sit down and write out a few tries for your story arc and show it to your mom or show it to your best friend or show it to somebody that you trust will never betray those things. You know, it's just a muscle. You gotta start lifting. Yeah.
And I
Go ahead,
sorry,
Fred.
yeah, if you don't mind me. So there's a great question in the chat here from Robin Arnold, where she's asking, what is your recommendation for founders that have to pivot on their message to support a change in products or service offered? That's a great question, and one of the best startups I've written on, Doppler. They're backed by Sequoia. They help you manage your application secrets, and I'll keep it at a high level there. But basically, they were working on two products, and they had to sunset one because they determined that their users really, really wanted the other one. So in terms of communicating that, especially to the individuals who like the other product that they had on offer, what they did was they were just very direct. This is why we're sunsetting it. Here's the reasons. We'd love your feedback, but this is the way that we're going, given the limited resources and time that we have to develop both. And the core set of users really love the clarity, the transparency, and just the honesty that came with having to take away a somewhat popular product to double down on what the majority loved and taking that in a direction. So the moral, or I guess the takeaway from that, is to be direct. Don't wait to do it if it's a matter of life and death. And maybe it is, maybe it's not, but you should look at communicating this change to your customers as an opportunity to partner with them. Doppler's founder found it to be an incredibly valuable opportunity to enrich and deepen the partnership that they have with their customers, not just a simple transaction of I'm paying you for X or Y service or product, right? And I would say going back to the founders who struggle in communicating this, the reason why Founder to Founder has been such a great success so far is because I'm helping founders being able to concisely tell their story in a preset format that helps them really drill down and clarify in 2 sentences. I always tell them you should be able to explain the problem, market, solution, team, each one in 2 sentences. And that that practice in being concise helps them on platforms where you need to be concise, like Twitter, to communicate their message effectively, given the limited amount of characters. So I'll just leave it at that. But great points, Elizabeth. Yeah.
And I think too, just very quick, that's also an excellent example of why marketers and writers tell you to stay away from hammering the features, because you can pivot a message. In a lot of cases, you're still solving a problem for your customers, or you're still offering a solution that they didn't know that they needed. And if all of your marketing materials are based on your customer's perspective of what you're able to do for them, how you can make their life better, then it makes it a little easier to pivot that message to a different product or service, because the ultimate story is still the same. You're still the same, you're still the same company that cares about your customers and wants to drive value to them. Drive value, that's such a marketing term, but you know what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, those are great points, guys. Thank you for taking the time to weigh in. So my last question for you goes back to developing the storytelling muscle and learning how to write and storytell effectively. So throughout your journeys as writers, what have been some techniques that you've used to develop your unique voices? And what advice do you have for founders that are looking to develop those voices? What steps can they take to do that?
Tell them the same thing I used to tell my language students. You have to read. You have to read a lot of things, pen a few different, and not necessarily, don't read all the same thing, but I don't think there's anything better than reading prolifically to help you develop your own storytelling voice, especially when you're writing. There's just There's just nothing like it. And I'm sorry to anyone who hates to read. That's the that's the unfortunate truth.
Yeah, I have to echo that. You definitely need to read, and I would be even more specific in saying that, if you really want to develop a unique storytelling voice, read books, especially older books. They're more challenging, and it's going to require you to grapple with the canon. A book doesn't exist in a vacuum. There's multiple references, layers, understandings, tropes that you can engage with at every single level. And from that, you figure out what you like, what you don't like. And through that, you develop, you'll divine your own storytelling voice that will be at least, maybe it won't be unique, but it will be more original than what other founders or just other people who write for a living will be able to, convey to their audience. Yeah, I mean, Elizabeth's completely right. Read. I should do more reading, especially of old books.
We all should.
We all should. Exactly.
The lucky thing is it doesn't matter what kind of reading you're doing. If you read fiction, read fiction. And if you read self-help, read self-help. And if you read romance, read romance. We don't, but just consume the written word. And someone said down here, reading develops your ear. That's so true. It's your inner ear. Yeah. Read everything you can.
Yeah,
Agreed.
so to close it out and give some actionable next steps, I'd love to learn from each one of you, what are some of your favorite reads that you recommend to anybody who's getting started?
Oh man, I don't even know where do you even start on that? That may have to be like an email later on that I just send you like 10,000 things for you to read. I have really been getting into the Substack space lately. Man, what a wealth of short, long, anything you could possibly be interested in. People have free and paid Substack newsletters, and it has just been fascinating. And they're good about doing highlight reels. They have the Substack team, if you sign up for their emails, will send examples of things around a theme. If you just want, quick consumable, not quick necessarily, but consumable reads on your mobile phone as you're doing whatever it is that you're doing. I also really like short stories. Those are fun. I just finished Arrival is one of my favorite movies of all time. And I just finished reading the short story series that inspired that movie. I don't know. I have a mild panic attack anytime anybody asks me what I recommend to reading, because there's just too many. I don't know.
I mean, how can they expect you to just pick one?
I'm gonna narrow it down. Everybody just email me on LinkedIn and I'll send you like 1,000 different things to read.
Awesome. Fred, do you have any favorites that you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I have, within the context of this conversation, the best resource I could share is Ben Thompson's tech blog, Stratechery. It's really well done, in-depth profiles and pieces on the latest that's going on in the tech ecosystem. So a lot of founders, VCs, software engineers, product managers read that. And for me, it's kind of the basis for my newsletter, Founder to Founder, which is a Substack newsletter, by the way, and I'll plug it here in the chat in a second. It's the basis for me to improve my writing and to help founders that I profile on there improve their writing and deliver higher quality, more effective content that other people can take action on. So.
Great. Well, thank you both. It's been great to hear your unique experiences, insights, and advice. So with that, I'm sure that there are a ton of questions in the audience. Like, you all have been very engaged in the chat. So I'd love to invite anybody who has a question to unmute themselves, come on stage and ask a question. Don't be shy.
Hey guys. Interesting conversation. This is Bobby Carlton. I've been working in PR for 35 years, and I recently bought a magazine. So now I'm the one getting pitched. And I'm curious, like, what percentage of your writing you're doing from pitches versus things you discover yourself?
Yeah, great question. So for me, I've actually never taken a pitch from a PR firm when it comes, if it's a startup pitching me. And the reason why is because one, I get a ton of pitches, and so I just don't really have the time to go through all of them. And two, a lot of my writing is based on having a very deep and strong relationship with the founders that I work with. And so, having an intermediary being a PR firm generally doesn't work that well in terms of fostering a long-term relationship. And I will just say I am probably the odd one out because I don't have a journalism degree. I kind of fell into this world, if you will. And so, yeah, that's just kind of my experience dealing with PR firms. But I will say, I guess in a more general sense, if you are getting pitched or you're delivering pitches to writers, the most important thing is to understand what that writer writes, what they're good at writing, what they don't do, because I get a lot of pitches that on topics that I will never cover, because I just don't have an interest in it. And so when I see that person pitching me, it tells me they haven't done their homework, and I won't consider an email from them again. Just being honest.
Yeah, I get a ton of pitches because my name is Elizabeth Wallace, and I'm one of probably 10 million Elizabeth Wallaces out there. And I know there's an Elizabeth Wallace that writes for CNN, and I get all of her pitches. And I write for tech, and I get, stuff for, toddler clothing lines. And I'm like, it's not me, guys. I can't cover this for my beat, But I every once in a while, I will take a pitch from a PR firm. But I don't have a lot of, I have to run it by my editor first to see if there's interest in the platform for me to do this interview. It's a lot of times I get pitches for things that are very time intensive for me that are kind of copy pasted, I think, to everybody else. And so it's like, if you want to set up an interview with this founder to talk about, and then it's some vague subject. If you want this founder's opinion on IoT, I think was the last one that I got. And I was like, IoT, but what branch of IoT, what does he want to say about it? Like,
that's all right, Elizabeth.
Does he do IoT?
I've been getting pitches for what my favorite one was the all-male founding team of a men's underwear company.
Oh, cool. Okay.
I'm writing for female founders.
Right. Yeah. And so I think definitely what Frederick said, did they even look at what I do for a living? But I think every once in a while I'll take one because it's not something time intensive on my part. It's not 1,000-word interview that I have to do, that I have to come up with. There's not a lot of background on what the purpose of this is. I'll take a quote that they send me or something like that. But it's hard to take pitches like that because I have to go through a series of editors to pitch the story myself, and a lot of times it's just not a relevant. There's no so what involved. There's no big story there. It's I don't know. It just feels like a form letter that they filled out looking for anybody to kind of.
I'm getting between 600 and 800 pitches a day. And, most of it's going into a spam or a junk folder, but I've taken a couple of pitches, and obviously
How do you even sift through that? I feel like we should have a Zoom meeting about how in the world you sift through 600.
You don't.
Pitches. It's intense.
You don't.
Wow.
But I know that I also make a living on the other side doing intense research and, putting together stories that I do pitch to reporters who take them happily. Mm-hmm. So,
I think that's the difference. I think it's always really obvious when someone has really taken the time to curate a story for me to be able to then give to my editors. There's a clear message there. It's not just someone's opinion about IoT. It's something something curated for me,
But I was curious how much the two of you took, if anything.
Very little. But again, I think a lot of that is because most of the pitches are just irrelevant. They're not even meant for this Elizabeth Wallace. They're meant for a different Elizabeth Wallace. In their defense, that's a very common name.
I'm lucky. Odd name.
Yeah, just a quick question here off of that as well. So, on the other side, whether it's a pitch or a story you guys are finding, yourselves, what are I know it's probably hard to pick and choose, but what are the topics that are or topics or reasons for going into a story that's most exciting for you when you choose what to write about next?
Some of it's driven by my editor. I want I just want to talk about somebody doing something cool, which is not helpful because that's entirely subjective. Somebody making a difference, somebody thinking about something in a way that makes me go, oh my God, I never thought about that. That's just somebody doing something cool.
Yeah, for me, so I have a couple of topics that are definitely a priority. So that's aerospace, fintech, social media, gaming, and productivity is kind of a catch-all. And construction, I just happen to run into a lot of them. I just developed expertise in that area, so I'll take one if it comes across my desk. But I have a lot of free range in terms of what I'm able to publish. I generally don't have to get my stuff checked by an editor, so it gives me a lot more flexibility in terms of what I can choose to take on and what I don't. But I tend to stick with those things because one, I have, I've built up expertise over time, either through my studies as being an engineer and, professional work as an engineer, or, the fact that I've just written on so many stories that I have a great working knowledge of what you're doing in this space, because the founders probably talked about some adjacent problem that you pitching me, you're probably solving. So there's that. Anything outside of that, it takes a lot more to get me excited about. But I'm open. I've written on everything from biotech to blockchain, so I'm always open to another challenge.
Sounds great. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Does anybody else have any questions? I think Bobby just put a question in the chat. So Fred and Elizabeth, if the two of you need to search, not a question, comment, but I'm going to give it a plug anyway. So if you need subject matter experts, feel free to check out Innovation Women.
Great. No, great job. Yeah, I really enjoyed the chat here. And yeah, so Leia, Elizabeth, and Frederick, what are the best ways for anybody that was on this chat, to follow along with all of your stories and platforms, and connect after the discussion tonight?
Elizabeth, you want to go first?
Sure. I was just unmuting myself. I just threw my LinkedIn in the chat. I have a website, but I'm not always great about updating it. Ironically, as a writer, I don't update my own website. But my LinkedIn is in the chat. That's a good starting place, and then you can find me from there. Yeah. And then Frederick is Substack up there too. I don't know if anybody saw that, but go subscribe to that. I didn't realize you had one of those. And so that is definitely do that.
Yeah. I appreciate you plugging it right there. So yeah, I'll go ahead and put it in the chat again. Here's my Substack, Founder to Founder, so you can follow me there. For free subscribers, content comes out 3 times a week to Startup Spotlights, just a high level overview of the company. And it comes out every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And then there's the case studies. They're much more in depth, come out every other Monday, and it's behind a paywall. So it's for paid subscribers only. And that's $60 per year or $7 per month. So there you go. My social media, you can just look me up on LinkedIn, just my name, Frederick Dasso there. Twitter, Fred Soda. So I'll just put that in chat as well. I'll just put all my handles in the chat. You guys are free to follow me Instagram here also. And yeah, that's pretty much it. If you guys have any questions, oh, let me just put my email here. If anyone wants to email me, at gmail.com. So yeah, this is my email where I take all, writing pitches or just, want to talk. Feel free to send me an email there. Oh, whoops. I'm sending it to private chat. Let me just put it in public. But yeah, that's it. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I'll put in for everyone, here. Yeah, I'll put in a link to our other upcoming events as well. Again, some are through Prepare for VC and other partners in the startup community. So definitely check those out. Yeah, actually, Leia, you didn't get a chance. If you want to share, EllisX and yeah, some info for people to follow up on there as well.
Yeah, so for me, the best way to connect with me would be Twitter. I'm the most active on that platform. I don't check LinkedIn very often. So I'm going to put in my handle in the chat. And for any writers who are looking to connect with diverse subject matter experts, like I would recommend checking out EllisX. It's free, and each and every expert on the platform and joins by invite only. They're pre-vetted, pre-verified. All of them come from entrepreneurial backgrounds. 40% are underrepresented, meaning women, people of color, immigrants. Yeah, so that's my spiel. Back to you, Jason.
Sounds great. No, appreciate it. And I've used it on the event side to connect with great founders. So definitely happy to, yeah, give it a plug there. Everyone should check out EllisX. And yeah, would love to have, everybody, anyone that wants to continue the conversation, happy to chat in our community page or LinkedIn as well. And yeah, really appreciate our amazing panel tonight, all the audience members, and great questions. And yeah, thanks everybody for coming out. And yeah, we'll be sharing this in our on our YouTube channel and in our community as well.